for our next talk, we have two speakers, Patrick and Ronny. Patrick is currently a PhD student at the University of Delft. His work focuses on trustworthy AI for finance. And Ronny is an associate professor from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. He has some really cool packages that we use in our lab, so manop.jl and manifolds.jl. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for allowing us to speak about something that's not related directly to my packages. I'm just using that, namely Quarto extensions for the Julia community. If you want to see the slides yourself, the QR code down here is the slides on the net already, but we have a link on the last slide as well. So we split our talk into 4 parts. I will first talk a bit about what is Quarto, and then the next 3 ones are what do we use it for. And I'm mainly using it for documentation and tutorials. But let's start with the first part. What is Quarto?
Yeah, then we'll go on to see the...
Oh, wasn't that my part? Go on. Just give me the next slide. Exactly, what is Quarto? So Quarto is an open source cross-platform publishing tool for scientific works, just in very general. It originally comes from, I think, Markdown R or R Markdown. So the idea is you write Markdown code, but that includes code. So we brought a small example here. That's just a header. You have a bit of Markdown code, and then you have Julia code. And here we also already have one thing that's nice. You can say echo true to see results of that code block or not. So you could say echo false, then you just see the code but not the result. Because maybe the result is a very cluttery, long output, like an error message, which is nearly infinitely long. So it's based on Markdown, and for me, if you're coming from Pluto, I originally came from Pluto, the switch is, Pluto is a Julia code file with Markdown strings. This is a Markdown file with Julia code cells. But these are basically code cells that run. And behind that, they also use a lot of pandoc, so you can basically mark down to anything with Quarto as well, so to PDF or something like that. And it's really for technical reports or any documentation you want to do, and renders that into different templates and custom styles. That's the idea. And really easy to write, hopefully, because it's really just Markdown. So the first thing then is Julia themed Quarto.
Yes, thanks, Ronny. Yeah, so I'll talk a bit about a first set of Quarto extensions. Extensions are essentially just a way to extend the behavior of Quarto. In many cases, you will perhaps want to just extend the styling. So sometimes many of these publishing systems can feel like they're boxing you in a bit into a certain style framework. So the first very simple extension that I'll be presenting here is just Julia-themed styling for your Quarto documents. This is all open source, so you can download it and get started. As you may have noticed, there's already some Julia colors here in the slides. So we're actually using the extension to produce these slides. It's very easy to use extensions in Quarto. Everything is installed just straight from the command line into your existing project. And then you essentially, to use those extensions, just define those options in the YAML header. So the YAML header just specifies essentially the configuration for your current Quarto document. We have added theming for HTML documents, so HTML articles, as well as Reveal.js presentations, which is what you're looking at right now. And then there are very simple Quarto commands for previewing your documents when you're working on them and also ultimately rendering them. So just a bit of detail here on what the theme actually uses. We use the Julia mono font, which is a font that's open sourced for all monospace and code text. Following recommendation from Comullion, who some of you may know from the online community, I've recently switched to this Barlow font for font headers. And then there's a few other fonts that we use for details. All of this is just a starting place in case you want to have a theme that gets you closer to a Julia style document, but you can go on and then add your own touches to that. So it's again not meant to box you in into some standardized theme. It's just a way to get you started if you want to. This is what inline code looks like. So this print statement here is using the Julia green, and it is using the Julia mono font. Unfortunately, code cells in Reveal.js are not affected, so this is just the default code, but we can move over here to see on our corresponding website what this looks like. So again, we have Julia color theme going on here, and let me just move back here. Okay. And in general, we try to use the Julia colors as much as possible. So different callouts are in Julia colors. So it's very gimmicky, but it just, I think, adds a nice touch to your presentation slides. All my talk slides were produced using this extension. Yeah, and now we'll move on to some actual tooling. So how to use Quarto for your documentation.
Exactly. So I was writing a few tutorials for one of my packages, man.jl, and then I had the following problem. I wanted to have them integrated in Documenter, and with that I mean I want to use addref to reference any document string that we have in Documenter available, or even link to other documentations with Documenter interlink from Michael Goertz. Include mathematical formula, of course, so that's really just some math stacks or something. And it should render into Markdown to then be further rendered by the documenter. That was my workflow that I wanted to have. But further on, I also wanted to have that you see codes and results, and that also includes plots. It should be reproducible, so 100% reproducible. We will come to that in the end. And it should run on CI, so it should be hopefully also cached, because if you write 20 tutorials and every time you kind of like publish a new version or you do a pull, it shouldn't run all these 20 things, but maybe just the one that you changed. That's the overall goal that I wanted to achieve. And that turned out to be more complicated than I thought, but let's get into that. So what you do is, so in your package, what I did just to follow up on the next few setups, I have a tutorials folder where I write a tutorial like this, and I just introduced one or two further things like output false means this cell is never printed. So echo false means the result of the cell is not printed. Output false means the cell itself is also not printed. So this package activation is important for us to be reproducible, but if the user reads the tutorial, that's irrelevant. And then just starting a bit of things. But this is basically I cd into the directory tutorials and I activate the environment to make it reproducible. That was the idea. So I want to run the code when I'm generating the documentation, and it's not yet there, as an MD file to then be further rendered and generated into the menu of the documentation or something like that. So that's the general workflow I wanted to follow. Yes? And then what you have to do is you set up this Quarto YML file in the tutorials folder. And there's one important line here which misses the last slash because our page is a bit too short, but I couldn't shorten that. That says the output directory is the docs source tutorial folder. So as soon as it generates the markdown file, it copies it over there. And then you can even specify, please don't render this file. And that's for, well, you do a benchmark that runs an hour. And that one you check and manually with git add and do not render on CI, and then you exclude it here. That's the idea. So whenever you work on a file, you would do just Quarto render file QMD on terminal, and it would just generate the markdown file. If you specify the folder, it runs everything in the folder besides the one that you exclude. And the rest is just a bit of setup. I want to render to markdown, so I say I want to have comment mark, and please do $ as techmath. So I have to use dollars for techmath. But then it generates all that, and it keeps a cache in tutorials_freeze, so it recognizes was the QMD file changed or not to re-render or not re-render. That's the main technicality here. Then we come to the third workflow slide. I forgot this one. In VS Code, the preview that was already mentioned is automatically available, so you have two tabs. One is your code, one is the markdown preview, and as soon as you save, it renders. It's a bit of LaTeX style-ish, not live preview, but nearly live. Okay. Then the third part is, how do I get that into Documenter? And the one disadvantage of Quarto currently is it renders with Jupyter that needs Python. And you're like, oh, I have to install Python, and I have to remember all the versions, and it has to fit. Luckily, there's conda pkg that does that for us. So we just specify in conda pkg toml that we want to have some Python version and any Jupyter version. And anything that I add to my make.jl, all that I have to add is this one here. So with the environments from conda pkg, I want to do Quarto render the tutorials folder. And that means whenever I call make.jl, it renders all my tutorials. But since I have the freeze folder, only those that were changed. That's the whole setup we need. So that's the whole workflow locally. And the next slide is, I think, the workflow on GitHub Action. The one thing you have to add to your Documenter GitHub Action is these few lines, which is basically a cache. So I'm caching the tutorials freeze folder, and I'm caching the docs source tutorials folder. Because this one stores the readily rendered ones, and this is the freeze where Quarto checks whether it has to re-render, and then we're fine. So with that, the GitHub CI automatically only re-renders those that were changed in the last push compared to the cache. And that's then really neat, and Documenter doesn't run for 2 hours, but really just 10 to 15 minutes again. That's a bit technical and took me a while, but luckily it's now working. So then I hope my next slide is already caveats. Ah yeah, there we are. Caveats are, if we have a breaking version of the package, we have to manually delete the cache on the GitHub CI. Otherwise, it just thinks it's half cached and it doesn't work. So I would say cache is maybe a bit of a trade-off sometimes because breaking changes. Maybe one thing that might help if the last cell of your Quarto notebook is then some print that just does package status so that you get the recent package versions. Also for someone reading the whole thing, because your tutorial might be outdated. And then at least you can see that in the last cell because it says this one ran with, I don't know, manup.jl 3 point something, which is from last year. And then you know, maybe I should ask someone what the new style of that is. The one caveat that I ran into was we want to do add ref to something to reference something. And sometimes this is the format you have, that you have a text, but you want to reference B. And since Quarto thinks those are all URLs back here, it escapes the space. So you always get that one, and that doesn't work with Documenter. The one trick that you can do in Quarto is behind the, you put it in code, so backtick, and then you say this is comment mark, and it stays as is. That's the equal comment mark thing. And then you can use anything in Documenter, ref, or something to reference something. And the only thing that's different from classical Documenter is 2 backticks was math in any Julia doc string. The Pandoc developer is not so happy about that. We have to use $. Well, for Pandoc, anything in backticks is code. And they don't count number of backticks just to have basically nested codes. That's what they do. And I talked to the Pandoc main developer, and he was like, they use what for math in Julia Documenter? So they don't want to support that, and I can completely understand that because counting backticks is a probably quite complicated thing. But with that, with these caveats, you're basically good to go. And just to summarize, I think my next is already my summarize slide for my part here. So as I said, we get tutorials that are reproducible, that have executed code, even plots work and all like that. They are cached and rendered on CI, so you don't have to care about that yourself. It's done automatically on CI. You can use add ref from Documenter, and just to repeat those 2 packages, because I'm really a fan of those, you can use Documenter interlinks to reference doc strings from other documentations of other Julia packages. That's Documenter interlinks. And you can use, if you set it up correctly with a bibtex file, Documenter citations and cite really literature. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get to Documenter Markdown, to have all that in one place, and even have the literature at the end of the tutorial. The same style as Documenter does anyways with this amazing package, Documenter Citations. And again, both are from Michael Gertz. He did some really great work on Documenter recently. So there's the shout out for that. These are clickable links. If we have time in the end, we can maybe take a short look into the optimize first example and its source. And the Julia forum post I posted is a long explanation of all the setup that you have to do. But let's continue with the last extension before we get into maybe a bit of demonstration of code. I forgot a slide. Sorry for that. One thing that's coming soon, I mean, I said we need Pluto to run Jupyter to render all that. And it's not like, there is a recent development, which is Quarto Notebook Runner JL, which should eliminate the use for Jupyter and Python in between. So then you have a whole workflow that just uses Julia. And even better, there's an issue open by fonts already that discusses, instead of Quarto notebooks, we might also just expect Pluto notebooks to work as well. And then I might even switch back to Pluto because that's how I interactively write most of my stuff. And then I convert it to Quarto currently. So that might even be adventurous for that. So we will see. Maybe let's do questions after. Okay.
I just want to mention that it's actually out.
I know that it's out, but it doesn't work so well with my workflow yet. So it's.
Okay, I thought you, because of just a week ago, they posted from pre-release to release.
Yes, the main problem is that every notebook needs the config currently to run with that, and I can't do that in the _QuartoML globally yet. So that's my soon. It's definitely there to try already. It's just not yet 100% working, but I'm really looking forward to that. But with that, I think we're really at the point to get to the last of our extension blocks, right? Yeah.
Show of hands, has anyone here published in JuliaCon proceedings? Oh, okay, I was expecting at least one or two, but fair enough, you should. The process is actually already really good because they use the JOSS, the Journal of Open Source Software process. So reviewing takes place on GitHub, for example, which I really like. They have a nice Julia package repo that makes a template available. One thing that I was still missing when I was working on my last submission was Quarto support. Which is maybe a little much to ask, but I see Luca just joined here. We could actually have this in the future. Wouldn't it be cool if all the documents that you perhaps already produce in Quarto for your documentation, so we just heard a lot about that, if you could use those, which are mostly just pure markdown blended with some code cells, and move chunks of that directly into your JuliaCon proceeding submission to have a nice starting point. To do that, I've worked on a extension. So we saw a very simple extension earlier. Another form of extension that Quarto also supports is extensions for academic journal LaTeX templates and JuliaCon proceedings. So the Quarto JuliaCon proceedings extension is just that. Again, very easy to install this. It's open source, so you can already try this out. You just add the extension locally to your project, and then you specify the configurations in your YAML header. And what you get is ultimately a PDF that looks already very, very, very close to what the final Quarto submission with the official template currently looks like. There are a few discrepancies still. So disclaimer here, this is not yet, officially supported by JuliaCon proceedings, but hopefully, looking at Luca here again, we'll get there in the future. So thanks. So the motivation here is that we've heard this already now, that of course it's nice to have both your code, your results, and your text all in one document. Quarto has support for executable code blocks. So there's an extra layer of unit testing, if you want, where your document that will ultimately make or render the publication will also execute code examples that you're running perhaps or showing as part of your JuliaCon proceedings publication. So if anything is wrong there, you will see that in the final render and the code will throw an error. So that's nice. And of course, one key advantage of Quarto is that you can use the same source document to render to different document types. So you can render to PDF if you prefer to print out your readings. You can also produce a HTML document from that very same source document. And we'll see an example of what that could look like in a moment. So this is essentially taking my first JuliaCon publication and putting it through this process and rendering a HTML document instead of a LaTeX or a PDF document, and it looks like this. Yeah, this is just a website. You can see that it uses the Quarto Julia theme. So again, we have the Julia colors here. Of course, this would support animations in your JuliaCon proceedings publication, which is quite nice, I think. Math is, of course, supported. Something like, I think here we used mermaid diagrams. They immediately supported. So just to give you a flavor of where this could go. And then I'll just leave you with this slide. So currently, as I said earlier, there are remaining discrepancies, but they're very minor. So on the left, I think we have, yeah, exactly the proposed version, so rendering my previous publication through the Quarto extension, and on the right is the published version that's currently on JuliaCon proceedings. You can see that there's like minor differences here. I haven't really been able to figure out what's going wrong, but I think it should be possible to get us to the final point where the extension renders the same PDF. Okay, so finally, just a few more resources for you if you want. So there's, of course, the official Quarto documentation. There is Ronny's amazing Quarto blog post on writing documentation with Quarto. So that's this third bullet point here on ManOp tutorials. Let me see what this one was. Oh yeah, this is a blog post that I have if you just want to know a little bit more about what Quarto extensions are. And then we have a few examples. Yeah. This one, yeah?
Yeah, the last one. Let's see whether it loads and make it a bit larger. Just to, where's the plus? Too many different keyboards. I have 3 keyboard layouts in my mind, so I mess it up on every. So one thing you can see here is, this is again a citation. If you would click on that, you get to the references. So these two as well. This remaining manifold link actually links from manop back to manifolds.jl, so that's in Documenter interlink. And if you scroll down a bit, I mean, you see a bit math in there. I'm a mathematician by trade. But if you go a bit further down, you see the first code here where you directly see, I want to work on the sphere. That's again a link to manifolds.jl, not directly the package. And then you see, oh, if we run gradient descent, that's the result we see. So you always see the code and the result. And that's what you automatically get, and you know that it works. And with that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you for showing us this really cool stuff. Are there any questions for the audience?
Thank you. It was a nice talk. More of a maybe a shield. If you also want to do package development in this, I gave a talk on Wednesday on doing literate programming using Markdown, and I think it would be very well possible to combine my package. It's still a Python package, so you do need Python. But it allows you to tangle files from Markdown into what would become a normal package, and it also allows you to do the reverse. So you can do debugging on your code, and it updates the Markdown for you. So then and it has some Quarto syntax support. So in the future, I will try to build in Quarto support in there, and then you can have all of this and package development.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. That sounds very interesting.
Hi, thanks a lot. It seems very cool. I actually never knew about Quarto for real. I have just one question. Would this be a suitable way also to write bigger things like book chapters or stuff like this, or is more for smaller papers and or for some reasons?
As far as I'm aware, there are books written in Quarto, definitely. I mean, then you have different markdown files and you would render them individually, but then there's a way to combine that again to one so that you don't have a 20,000 line markdown file. I mean, you then want to organize the stuff a bit, but I think there's quite a few ones.
Yeah, Quarto actually supports quite a few different outputs, so even entire websites. Myself, I'm a bit of a Quarto addict, really. So even my website is built in Quarto. It's also using the Quarto Julia extension, so that's the same font theme here, and then a little bit on top of that. So you can, well, I don't want to make this a product pitch about Quarto, but you can do a lot of things with Quarto. So there's a lot of different outputs, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, and very cool and polished it looks.
Yes, thank you for the talk. And to continue a bit on the last question, so once I saw the Quarto talk here at the previous JuliaCon, I immediately switched to it for writing my course notes for my classes, and it's very easy to also write large projects, much easier than LaTeX, I would say. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
So once again, thank you.
Thank you.